Hey everybody, welcome to Mr. Moonlight's Brutally Honest Storytelling Notes. This is another episode. It's been a little bit of time since I last posted, but I am back. I just finished a move from Arizona to Texas. I lived in Texas before. I'm back in Texas, and I'm ready to get back to work. I've actually been working very hard on visual effects for a web series that I can't talk about at the moment, but maybe I can relay my experience later on down the way and turn that into some storytelling notes. This is kind of, before we get to the main segment, which is I saw season 3 of Stranger Things. I thought it was very entertaining, but there were some story issues that I think should be addressed, and if you're writing a story, you may want to consider them as well. But before we get to that, I just want to let everybody know that there are more interviews, more segments coming up. This is, well, how many segments do I have at the moment? I have Backyard Indies, where I interview filmmakers, actors, technicians, special effects artists. But I also have The Practical People, where I interview practical effects artists in the industry. Those are two of my shows. Then, of course, there's this segment, the Brutally Honest Storytelling Notes. And I'm going to be having a fourth segment soon, which is going to be called So You Want to Make Comics. And that is going to be comic book oriented, of course. Now, the reason that I'm kind of separating these out is originally I was interviewing some comic book artists about filmmaking, because there are a lot of people who want to turn their film scripts into comic books, which I think is generally not a good idea unless you have a real working knowledge of how comic books work and how comic book readers respond to different stories. It's an entirely different industry. It's an entirely different art form with its own language. And I love comic books. I have read them since I was a young teenager. Actually, no, before I was a teenager. But my passion for them formed when I was a young teenager. And from there, I actually tried to get into the comic book industry for a while, which is a story unto itself. I had a little bit of success, nothing that you would have heard of, but I want to get back into comic books. And so I know all these great comic book writers and artists. So I'm going to try and get them on to be interviewed, and I'll do segments where we flip through comic books and talk about how they're written, how they're broken down, how the artwork works, how the page layouts and the designs all come together to form these stories. I have interviews coming up with comic book writer Mike Barron, who did Nexus and The Badger, and also has written for both DC and Marvel Comics. I have an interview coming up with David Lloyd, who's the artist for V for Vendetta with Alan Moore, that was turned into I believe a Wachowski brothers movie. I couldn't get into the movie, but the comic book is fantastic. We've already had an interview with Val Merrick on household filmmakings. I hope to get him back. And I know a lot of other artists and writers, so we're going to talk to them all. And if you are interested in making comics, you're going to want to listen to this. And hey, you know what? If you're a screenwriter that wants to turn their movie script into a comic book, listen to it as well. I'm not saying it's impossible, but there are things you should know. Anyway, moving on to Stranger Things. So, again, I saw Stranger Things Season 3. There's going to be some spoilers in this, so please go watch it. It's on Netflix right now. If you don't have Netflix, you should go over to a friend's house who does have Netflix. I thought it was very entertaining. Let's start with the positives. The story had some definite fun aspects in it. The cast is always amazing. I mean, I'm just really blown away at what a great ensemble they are. The kids are really good actors. There are some standout characters that I really love. And, the monster stuff was cool. So, Stranger Things, when it first started, and this is something that I talk about a lot, it promised certain things. It promised to have a dark, moody story about Lovecraftian monsters from another dimension. It's still delivering on that, but there is certain aspects that have kind of evolved. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but I feel like some of these aspects have evolved because the fans responded to them in a certain way, and the writers went, oh, this is what the fans like. Let's give them more of that. Again, nothing wrong with that. But what does start to happen is when the fans respond very strongly to things, you start to just kind of go, all right, this is gratifying. The fans are really responding. Let's just keep pumping more and more of that in. And at a certain point, it starts to come at the expense of your story. And even though the fans at the time are responding well, the problem that you have is that this stuff isn't going to hold up over time. Eventually, that thing that they love is going to wear thin because you're not backing it up with the original reason that they showed up, the stronger story. So season 1 was very successful, I felt. Season 2 was a pretty good follow-up. They had an interesting story. The Upside Down was spreading throughout the town, and they were having a problem with those demi-dogs. It's like the Demigorgon, but in dog form. Never quite explained why they were in dog form all of a sudden. And 11 closed that portal. So season 3 opens up with Russians, which I thought was, okay, 1980s, perfect. The Russians were the villains. There was the Cold War. Absolutely. This could get very interesting. And I won't go through a lot of the story aspects. Again, this season was very entertaining. A lot of things were fine. But there was a certain moment at the climax of the season, the last episode, that I thought really did a disservice to the story. And again, I saw a lot of fans eating it up. This is great. We love this scene. It was really funny, and it was a cute scene. And I'm talking about when Dustin finally gets a hold of his girlfriend over their ham radio, or shortwave radio, or whatever, however you refer to it as. And they're in a dire situation. And I forget what it is. There's some code that they have to enter, and it has to do with something that I'm not familiar with. But Dustin realizes that his girlfriend would know the answer to this question that would crack this code. She's completely unaware of the fact that there's a giant monster, a la the Blob, chasing after people, and it's going to kill them. And they've broken into this underground Russian complex, and they have to enter this code to disable this machine, which will kill the monster. And she is adorable. And the scene is very funny. She demands that Dustin sing Neverending Story with her. And so the action and the suspense stops. And they had spent a lot of time building it up. The actors had worked really hard. The effects team had created this fantastic kind of blob monster with teeth. And suddenly we're getting a whole song that's, everyone stops, all the characters stop and go, what the heck? And they sing Neverending Story, and it's a really cute and funny moment. And that's fine. But placing it in the middle of a huge suspense build and then expecting the audience to get right back into the suspense right after that, that's too much to ask of the audience. And you've completely destroyed all tension with this silly moment. And it's essentially a cheap laugh. Now, there's nothing wrong with getting a laugh in any situation. Levity is always good in your storytelling. But to place it in that moment of tension, big mistake. Again, there are fans that disagree. I love this moment, but I was watching it with my family and my younger daughter, who is not familiar with the Neverending Story. Actually, no, she is familiar. No, she's seen the Neverending Story, but she just like turned and looked like, why are they singing? She was really into the moment, and I was really into the moment. And you don't want to do that to your audience, especially for a cheap laugh. Now, it may work the first time. People may go, hey, that was awesome. But over time, it's not going to hold up. This is not something that's good for repeat viewings. So the word for this is bathos, and it is something that's come up a lot. Now, there is a really great video on bathos that I'm going to recommend to you called, let's see, where is it? I have it here. The Last Jedi, How Comedy Killed a Movie. And it's by the YouTube channel, The Closer Look. I will link that in the description. So I'm going to talk a bit more about Stranger Things tomorrow, probably. I'm trying to do episodes every day. I don't know if I'm going to do this, but it definitely helps the algorithm. They say you got to do at least 10 minutes daily. That's a lot of content to keep up on, especially with how busy I am. But I'm hoping that we can continue this conversation and continue to learn more about storytelling through examining these different things. So again, this is brutally honest storytelling notes, but I'm also going to start pointing out movies that I love and movies that I think do successful things. Again, we're going to be interviewing more practical effects artists, more filmmakers and actors, and comic book artists. I'm also going to be doing more by showing you projects that I'm working on. I have a lot of projects coming up. Going to be doing tutorials around things that I'm creating. We're going to be making comics and movies this year. We're going to be building miniatures. We're going to be talking to makeup artists. We're going to have we're going to work with cameras. We're going to work with editing and visual effects. I'm going to try and make as much of this content available to you guys, which brings me to my Patreon. I really want to bolster up this Patreon. This is a full-time job for me, but a lot of times I do it at my own expense and even at a loss, which I would like to fix. So if you feel like this is stuff you want to join me for, head over to my Patreon. My Patreon is, of course, patreon.com/Christopher Moonlight. Again, there are going to be tutorials. You will get early looks. You will get downloads of interviews before they get released on my YouTube channel. I will also do some exclusive content in terms of photos and updates. So stay tuned for that. But again, that's my Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description, a link to a closer look. And I will be back. We're going to talk a little bit more about Stranger Things Season 3. And then we're going to have a conversation about some other YouTube videos that I've watched, which make some points which I kind of think are maybe not, I don't know. You know, everyone's got their point of view, but I'm going to kind of pick apart a few things that I think might be bad advice. We're going to talk a little bit about modern art and how learning it can be helpful in the creation of your art, but how just trying to repeat modern art is probably one of the worst things you can do in this day and age. So thanks for listening, and I will be back with more on Stranger Things Season 3.